The United States military has executed over 136 dangerous inmates since 1916. But in the last 50 years, no executions have been carried out. In this video, we will be looking at the 4 most dangerous inmates currently housed in the military prison, waiting to be executed. Number 1. Timothy B. Hennis. On May 9, 1985, just a few days to Mother's Day, a horrific crime unfolded in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Catherine Eastburn, the wife of Air Force Captain Gary Eastburn, was at home with her 3 daughters, 5-year-old Kara, 3-year-old Aaron, and 22-months-old Jana, while her husband was away on military training in Alabama. To prepare for an upcoming move to England, the Eastburns decided to rehome their English setter dog, Dixie, and placed an advertisement in a local publication. Timothy Hennis, a 27-year-old Army sergeant stationed at Fort Bragg, responded to the ad and visited the Eastburn residence on May 7, 1985, to adopt the dog. On May 11th, Catherine did not respond to her husband's routine phone calls. Days later, concerned neighbors noticed newspapers accumulating outside the Eastburn home and heard a baby crying inside. On May 12th, authorities entered the residence and discovered a gruesome scene. Catherine had been assaulted and stabbed multiple times. Kara and Aaron were found in their bedrooms, each also stabbed. Miraculously, Jana, who is now 40, was found alive in her crib, suffering from dehydration but unharmed. While searching the house for evidence, the investigators discovered fingerprints and hairs, and also proofs showing that someone tried to cover up the crime. Witnesses reported seeing a tall man in a members-only jacket leaving the Eastburn residence carrying a trash bag around the time of the murders. The witness also gave a full description of the suspect, and the investigators created a composite sketch which they released to the media. Following their investigations, they focused on Timothy Hennis, who had a strong resemblance with the composite sketch. He had also recently adopted the family's dog. Linking him to the household, he was taken into custody, and the witnesses identified him as the suspect. Other evidence also linked him to the crime. Authorities arrested Hennis and charged him with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault. In 1986, Hennis stood his first trial and was convicted on all charges and sentenced to death. He was transferred to the Central Prison in North Carolina. While serving his time in prison, Hennis received an anonymous letter claiming responsibility for the Eastburn murders. The letter was sent to the sheriff's office. In 1989, the North Carolina Supreme Court overturned his death conviction, citing prejudicial errors. Hennis was acquitted due to insufficient evidence directly linking him to the crime scene. After his acquittal, he re-enlisted in the United States Army and was promoted to the rank of staff sergeant, and in 2004, he retired. In 2006, advancements in DNA testing prompted a re-examination of evidence from the crime scene. Semen samples collected from Catherine Eastburn were found to match Hennis's DNA. Due to double jeopardy protections, civilian courts could not retry him. However, the military retained jurisdiction over his case. Hennis, who had retired from the Army, was recalled to face a court-martial at Fort Bragg. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence as a pivotal link between Hennis and the crime. Despite the defense's arguments challenging the integrity of the evidence and suggesting alternative explanations, the military jury found Hennis guilty. He was sentenced to death on April 15, 2010. As of March 2025, Timothy B. Hennis has been on death row for approximately 15 years, incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. In total, he has served around 19 years in prison. Number 2. Hasan Karim Akbar. On March 23, 2003, at Camp Pennsylvania in Kuwait, during the initial phase of the United States invasion of Iraq, Sergeant Hasan Karim Akbar, a member of the 101st Airborne Division, launched a deadly attack against his fellow soldiers. In the early morning hours, Akbar quietly turned off the generator which powered their camp, He then threw 4 hand grenades into 3 tents where soldiers were sleeping, and then opened fire with his automatic rifle firearm during the ensuing chaos. This assault resulted in the deaths of Army Captain Christopher S. Seifert and Air Force Major Gregory L. Stone, and wounded 14 other soldiers, primarily from grenade shrapnel. He was immediately subdued and taken into custody at the scene. He was charged with 2 counts of premeditated murder and multiple counts of attempted premeditated murder. News reports at the time claimed that Akbar had been recently reprimanded for insubordination and was told he would not join his unit's push into Iraq. In his diary, dated February 4, 2003, Akbar referred to mistreatment by his fellow soldiers, stating, "I suppose they want to punk me or just humiliate me. Perhaps they feel that I will not do anything about that. They are right about that. I am not going to do anything about it as long as I stay here. But as soon as I am in Iraq, I am going to try and as many of them as possible." His court-martial began in April 2005, where his defense attorneys argued that he suffered from mental issues, including paranoia and sleep disorders. Despite this defense, he was convicted on all charges and sentenced to death on April 21, 2005. Prosecutors stated that his diary entries and his actions showed that the attack was premeditated. On October 3, 2016, he exhausted his appeals. The next step requires the President of the United States, as Commander-in-Chief, to approve his execution order. As of March 2025, Hasan Karim Akbar has been on death row at the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, for nearly 20 years. Number 3. Ronald Adrin Gray. Ronald was born in Cochran, Georgia. He was a former U.S. Army soldier who became one of the most notorious serial killer and sexual offender in military history. His crimes, committed between April 1986 and January 1987, while stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, included multiple murders and assaults. He began his series of violent offenses on April 27, 1986, with the murder of a civilian, Linda Jean Coates, a 23-year-old Campbell University student. Over the following months, he continued his spree. He abducted, assaulted, and murdered another civilian, 18-year-old Tammy Kofer Wilson. Few months later, he also abducted, assaulted, and murdered Private Laura Lee Vickery Clay, an 18-year-old soldier stationed at Fort Bragg. Before her body was found, witnesses testified that they saw Vickery Clay with a man later identified as Gray. Her body was discovered weeks later in the woods at Fort Bragg, showing evidence of assault and multiple gunshot wounds. A .22 caliber pistol, stolen by Gray in November 1986, was found near her body. Few months after Laura's murder, Gray assaulted and attempted to murder Private Marianne Lang Namath, a 19-year-old soldier. He entered her barracks under false pretenses, restrained her, and assaulted her. Despite suffering severe injuries, Namath survived and later identified Gray as her attacker. After Namath's assault on January 6, 1987, Gray assaulted and murdered a 23-year-old civilian cab driver, Kimberly Ann Ruggles. She was dispatched to pick up a passenger named Ron at Gray's address. Her body was found the next morning near her cab, showing evidence of assault and multiple stab wounds. Gray's fingerprints were found on the cab's interior, and Ruggles' fingerprints were on money in his possession. Gray's arrest happened after his photograph appeared in the news, and Private Namath identified him as the one that attacked her. Physical evidence, including fingerprints and items linking him to the victims, further implicated him. In November 1987, Gray pleaded guilty in Cumberland County Superior Court to 22 felonies, including 2 counts of second-degree murder, multiple counts of assault, and other related charges. He received 8 life sentences, with 3 to be served consecutively. Subsequently, a military court-martial convened at Fort Bragg from December 1987 to April 1988, and he was convicted of 14 charges, including the premeditated murders of Private Vickery Clay and Kimberly Ruggles, the attempted premeditated murder of Private Namath, multiple assaults, and other offenses. On April 12, 1988, he was unanimously sentenced to death, dishonorably discharged, and reduced in rank to Private E1. The sentence was approved by the Commanding General of the 82nd Airborne Division on July 29, 1988. In July 2008, President George W. Bush approved Gray's execution, marking the first time a U.S. president had affirmed a military death sentence since 1957. However, subsequent legal challenges have delayed the execution. As of March 2025, Ronald Adrin Gray has been on death row at the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, for approximately 37 years. Number 4. Nidal Malik Hasan. On November 5, 2009, at Fort Hood, Texas, a mass shooting occurred, resulting in the deaths of 13 individuals and injuries to over 30 others. The perpetrator was Major Nidal Malik Hasan, a U.S. Army psychiatrist. This event stands as one of the most severe mass shootings on a U.S. military base. On that day, soldiers were gathered at the Soldier Readiness Processing Center, undergoing medical evaluations before deployments. At approximately 1:30 p.m., Major Hasan entered the facility armed with an FN-57 semi-automatic firearm and an older .357 caliber revolver. He shouted, "Allahu Akbar," an Arabic phrase meaning "God is great," and began firing indiscriminately at military personnel and civilians. Hasan fired over 146 rounds during the attack, targeting individuals both inside the building and those attempting to flee. The rampage lasted about 10 minutes and ended when civilian police officers responded and shot Hasan, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. Following the shooting, Hasan was taken into custody and transported to a medical facility for treatment of his injuries. After he regained consciousness, he was subsequently charged with 13 counts of premeditated murder and 32 counts of attempted premeditated murder. Hasan's court-martial began on August 6, 2013, during which he refused to shave his beards, stating that it was part of his religious beliefs. After so many arguments, the military judge allowed him to represent himself while still on a wheelchair. During the trial, he admitted to the shootings and offered little defense, stating that he decided to switch sides and was now against the government. He refused to call any witnesses or testify in his defense. On August 23, 2013, the military jury found Hasan guilty on all charges. 5 days later, he was sentenced to death. The sentence included forfeiture of all pay. He was still receiving paychecks during the trial, and allowances and dismissal from the service. As of March 2025, Nidal Malik Hasan remains on death row at the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, having served approximately 11 years and 7 months since his sentencing. Thank you guys for watching. Do you think the military should go ahead and carry out these executions? Comment below.